One. Hello everybody, this is Jane Bayler here. I'm live on the Smart Connected group this evening with an incredible and very inspirational entrepreneur, David Hunt. Welcome, David.
Hi, good evening everybody.
David is a clean tech expert and a thought leader. He is so prolific in his sector, and he is a very famous media personality, having been interviewed on the BBC and various other television channels and in newspapers. He has a podcast, and he is also the chief executive of Hyperion, which is an executive search company specialising in clean tech. Is that right, David?
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so David, let's just kick off and talk about what is your mission and why are you so excited in clean tech, and what is clean tech, because some of our viewers won't really know.
Sure, yeah. Clean tech's a bit of an umbrella term really for a number of technologies which do one of two things, or hopefully both: make the environment better or make society better. So things that people will be probably most familiar with would be solar panels, for example, and wind turbines, clean energy generation, and increasingly people will be seeing adverts for and hearing about electric vehicles. So those are the probably areas where most people will have some sort of involvement or at least awareness of clean tech. So it's an umbrella term for a lot of technologies, but those clean energy and clean mobility are two of the sort of the larger, most prominent sectors within that.
And is this very much a growth industry, or is it something that is just rolling on because it's been going on for some time?
No, it's a brilliant growth sector. When I joined or first got involved in solar back in 2007, I actually quit my or closed one of my previous businesses, sold that on to join, get involved in solar and clean tech. And a lot of people just laughed at me, thought I was absolutely crazy. Solar panels, what are you talking about? They're never going to work, especially in the UK. But obviously they were wrong, although it was tough at the beginning. But now it's $1 trillion industry on a global basis. So, you know, a lot has changed in that time frame. And within the next 5 years, people will see massive changes again, particularly around mobility.
So it may sound like a dumb question, but why do people care, and why is it such a growth industry?
I think increasingly, I'd like to think, you know, globally, not just because obviously there's a lot going on in the world at the moment, but generally people want to do with their time something impactful, something useful. Mm-hmm. And increasingly you see not just millennials, but everybody wants to work and do something useful with the time. We've got to be working. The nature of work is, of course, changing, but people want to do something where they can contribute to something bigger than themselves. And obviously, because sometimes that sounds a little bit trite or worthy, but generally people just want to have some impact in what they're doing, whether they're as an entrepreneur or whether they're, you know, as an employee. So increasingly, I think people, whether it's around, you know, again, social enterprises have become a very big thing, but you can actually not shy away from actually having a very good, lucrative career. You can build a very profitable business, but at the same time, do something impactful that benefits people other than yourself and your business.
So this issue of responsibility for our lives and our planet and for other people is very much a theme, I think, for a lot of people right now, particularly as we are in the middle of COVID-19, which is a global pandemic, and we're all conscious of our sort of global responsibility. And would you say that that is something that's motivated you?
Obviously, I've been in the sector for quite a while, but what really has been interesting during COVID, again, people have become quite used to the fact that you can hear the birds sing. There's obviously clean air. A lot of people have taken up cycling, and I think people become just a bit more aware of, particularly in cities, just how unlivable and uncomfortable they are when they're stuffed full of cars and pollution. And I think COVID clearly is not a good thing, but some of the positives that can come out of that is people can realize that we as society, we can work from home, we can be more sensible at how we travel. It's not the end of the world if we can't catch an aeroplane, and I travel a lot for business and plant a lot of trees accordingly. But yeah, I think people are recognizing that there are benefits to a cleaner way of being and a cleaner way of living.
Fantastic. So, David, tell me, how did you start your current business, and what motivated and inspired you in the beginning?
Really, it's because of my recognition for clean energy and what it can do for, you know, I've got 3 children, a couple of older children, 20 and 17, and one who's 7. So very conscious of the world that they're going to inhabit and inherit, both in terms of our family circumstances, but of course on the broader context as well. So I've always been minded towards having some kind of impact and being cautious of or careful for the environment. But it was in 2007, and it was quite the company before this that I started and in solar. And it was a real random coincidence. Prior to that point, I was a global international headhunter, but working in a variety of technologies, IT, telecoms, building services, various things. And it was bizarrely, my daughter started first, my oldest daughter started school. And at the school gates, a few people got talking, parents just getting to know each other. And I bumped into a guy called Mike Clark, and who had an electrical contracting business. And randomly over a beer, we were still sober, but we'd had a beer, asked about, do you know anything? I want to start installing wind turbines. I've heard it's a good idea. What do you know about it? And I said, well, I know absolutely nothing about it, but it sounds interesting. I'll go and find out. So I did some research into renewable technology and what was happening in particular in Germany. And I thought, this is amazing and really interesting. It's a bit of a tech geek, although not an engineer. And between us then, we decided that we would set this business up randomly without a huge amount of knowledge to install solar and wind turbines and sort of other renewable technologies. And that was in 2007. And after 8 years of growing that business quite successfully and really enjoying that side of things, I kind of went back to people. I think we touched on this before. I've got a real passion for people.
Yeah.
And I just figured there must be a way that I can combine these two things, my love for people, my love for the technology. And Hyperion was created in 2014 to combine those two things to headhunt specifically in clean technology.
That's absolutely amazing. And as you know, David, people is also my passion. So what would you say is most important about people in business and in clean tech? What are the real priorities in that space?
Yeah, I work with a lot of founder startup companies primarily. We do work with some large corporates and global companies, but what we really enjoy doing is working with post-investment startups to help them to scale. And it's the same as any business. The uniform things of what you need to be resilient, you need to be able to deal with chaos, you need to be able to pivot, you need to be able to construct teams around you. Of course, you need to be able to fund yourselves and make sure that you're paying your way. So those traits are universal, and that's what I really love about on the podcast, the people I talk to, is those things, whatever your business is. It's a people business. It's you and your resilience, the people you can put around you as co-founders or as original hires, and the support people that you can talk to scale your business. The fact that you can do that in a sector where you can actually have an impact on the world, for me, is the added bonus. And most of our clients feel exactly the same way. I can make some money, I can create a business, I can do all the entrepreneurial things, but at the same time, there's a positive impact from the stuff that we're doing.
Exactly, which I think is the really exciting thing about it. And do you find that the entrepreneurs that you work with are specifically attracted to clean tech because of these benefits, or are they just people that have drifted into the sector and are just curious? How committed are they?
Yeah, no, all committed, I think, because you have to be as an entrepreneur committed to what you're doing, because we know there's easy ways to earn a living, certainly in the early days.
Yeah.
And there's easier things that you can be doing. So certainly they're committed. A lot have come through universities and studied some form of technology, and obviously that's taken them on. Others because they, again, just feel that they want to make an impact, and they've been looking around for ways that they can do that in their career, and they can't necessarily do it in investment banking, although you can now in ways, but generally there are sort of some of the traditional places where graduates have gone to work now not necessarily as appealing. But what we're certainly finding now is people from traditional industries, automotive, oil and gas, and manufacturing, where they're, shall we say, sunset industries to an extent. They're in their decline, and they're looking to take those skills to places where they can, again, go home and tell their children something positive about what they've done today, not necessarily hide what they've been doing today. Yeah. So we do get an awful lot of people, and a lot of the founders have moved from traditional sectors to create a business in under the clean technology umbrella.
Fantastic. And how about investors? So what kind of investors are interested in clean tech right now? Are they just people who just see that there's an opportunity to make a lot of money because it's trendy, or are they people who are also committed in the same way as the founders?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There are some VCs who are, typical VCs. They see a market opportunity and they'll invest accordingly. But increasingly, a lot of the investors are, again, people who are using their banking experience and or VC experience, but again, want to invest in something meaningful. So impact investment, ESG is a term that increasingly is used. So at all levels, a lot of the investors we work with and their portfolio companies are dedicated purely to technology, clean technology, or one or two sectors, of which one clean tech is one. So there are people, we work with investors, some of whom write sort of 500k tickets, some of whom write 100 million tickets, which is nice. So there are some big investors out there that are really focused on the sector because it's the direction of travel. We all know, or hopefully people should recognize, that in 5-10 years time the world's going to be very different in terms of how its energy is supplied, in terms of how we get from A to B. And there's huge market opportunities there, and where there's market opportunities, obviously the money likes to go.
Definitely. So do you think the era that we live in now, do you think one day people will look back on this a bit like we look back on the Victorian age with all those chimneys all belting smoke and so on, and just say, oh, how did they messed up our world, but here we are, we've repaired it. Do you have a vision like that?
Yeah, I think most people in the sector really do have a genuine hope and optimism that we can turn things around. Clearly, it's going to be tough, and it's there's going to be absolute impacts from climate change that we're already seeing. But we can mitigate, we can do better. I think as a planet and as a society, we can do better. And I absolutely do think, in 10, 15, 20 years time, when we're talking to our children and grandchildren, they'll be looking at us like we were mad. What were you doing? Polluting, driving around in effectively a bomb around our cities, pumping out pollution, which is killing people, which, it's almost like us now looking back at people smoking in offices. You think, what, really? You used to smoke in offices? It's kind of the same thing, really. You used to sort of get your electricity from burning loads of coal. What were you doing? Which is funny, which is, again, one of my motivations to get involved. So my kids can't say that about me, at least.
That's lovely. So there's a real issue of legacy, and this is something that can be passed down through the generations, that you had a commitment to making the planet a better place. And isn't that a great way of actually connecting with people?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? One of the things I really love about the sector, and I'm not sure it's not entirely unique, but it is particularly good. There's an awful lot of collaboration, even amongst competitors. When we go to conferences, when I'm talking at events and shows, you'll see there's an awful lot of people who, are business competitors and compete on a basis I should expect, but equally they'll share within reason and they'll support one another. And that's really, again, because I guess we see the bigger picture. There's a genuine feeling that the rising tides lifts all boats. If we all do well and support each other, the whole sector will do well.
And I think the nice thing about it is that you're all committed to a purpose that's greater than profit. And it has been proven that purpose-driven businesses are usually more successful than profit-driven businesses. And it's also a way, as you said, of connecting with other people, isn't it? And actually putting all that competition to one side and actually saying, what, we're all here for the same purpose. So do you find that it is genuinely a very friendly environment, or is there still rivalries, or how do you find it?
Yeah, there are rivalries, and again, competing technologies within certain areas, and obviously competing companies. I don't want to get confused. So when I started in cleantech 2007, it was a little bit hippie. You still had, again, cliched people with sandals and beaded hair wanting to put a few solar panels on the house, which is not a bad thing, of course. But it's not a cottage industry. It's a $1 trillion industry, and more. And I'm really keen that people understand and accept that making profit is not a bad thing. Running a business is not a bad thing. On the contrary, if you do it right, it can benefit society, it can benefit the planet and the environment, and making profit is actually a very good thing. So we're very profit driven as an organization, and we support companies who are very profit driven. The VCs we speak to and work with on their behalf are clearly very profit driven, because that's essentially what they exist for. But you can do that in a way that's sustainable. You can do that in a way that's responsible, without that polarization that you're either Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, if you remember that far back, or you're a hippie. That you don't have to be in that extreme. In the middle, there's an awful lot of business people who are earning a good living, creating valuable businesses, creating some great exits, but at the same time can look back and say, I didn't just make money.
Great. So Within this sector, would you say that there are any important trends that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest impact that we'll see is around mobility and electric vehicles, and not just cars, like commercial vehicles, mopeds. There's a huge uplift at the moment in cycles, but electric cycles, through to electric aircraft. My old podcast recently had a guy that's in the technology of basically electric powered flight. So that all that will change quite dramatically in the next few years. And there's huge business opportunities there, but also huge threats to the existing car dealerships, auto shops, and all these things. So that's one of the challenges. Whenever there's a disruption, there's a winners and losers, of course. And I think for us, it's important to be able to, give as much heads up as possible to those that are in those sunset industries, that, you have a responsibility to yourself to think about your business and or your livelihood, and be aware of the trends that are coming. And that's tough at times. I was Fully Charged as a YouTube channel, also as a book that I wrote an article in there, particularly around disruption. And it's not easy for people to get their heads around. But if you look at your iPhone, now we do everything on our iPhones. And 2007, they didn't exist.
Yeah.
When you think of that's not that long ago, that our entire lives have changed completely because of this one device.
True.
And that device happened because there were a number of technologies at the time that converged. There was around data, there was around battery life, there was around touch screens, there was lots of different technologies that converged at the same time. And that's what we're seeing now in mobility.
Fascinating. So let's hear a little bit more about mobility. So what is actually going on then in that space? I mean, how long is it before we're all driving in electric cars, for example?
I would say within 5 years, you won't see many people manufacturing electric cars. There'll be legacy cars, of course, for a period of time, but and that astounds most people. But if you look at electric cars 2 years ago, they probably had a choice of 5 or 10.
Yeah.
This year, by the end of this year, you'll probably have a choice of more than 200.
Wow.
And that's going on. So the thing that really, I think, strikes people, I don't know, every time you fill up your gas tank, your petrol tank, I'm typically 60, 70 pounds. To fill up the equivalent distance in an electric vehicle is about £3.
Wow.
So it's not just about being good to the planet, which is good, and it's not just about not polluting our streets, which of course is good, but it's actually a damn sight cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the cars themselves are expensive at the moment, aren't they? And there's an issue with the charging capabilities, isn't there? Do you think that it's going to catch on, and do you think that when we go to petrol stations, they're not going to be petrol stations, they're going to be charging stations soon? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, it's a different dynamic. I think, firstly, the general consensus is that by 2023, there'll be no difference in cost between an electric car and a diesel or petrol car. So the actual capital cost will be pretty much the same within a couple of.
That's like no time at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, the biggest cost of a car is usually the battery, and the battery costs in the last have been going down 25% per year. So, that's one of the main cost things within the vehicle. Charging is really interesting, actually, because people, when you have to do disruption, things don't iterate in the same way. So, yes, there's public charging, but I very, very, very rarely charge at a public station. I come home, I plug in my car. Next morning, I'm good to go. And most people drive only about 10 miles a day. Of course, there are some people who drive up and down the motorways, and sales reps probably doing 50, 60,000 miles a year. But the vast majority of travel is about 10 miles. And now the average electric vehicle will do a 300-mile range, which isn't massively different from your petrol car. And in the next couple of years, again, that will be quite comparable. So people will charge at petrol stations, yes, and service stations, at home, at work. I've got a charge place at work, which again, I work on a campus, or offices on a campus. So we have charging at work. I have charging at home. If I get stuck, I'm on a long journey, yes, I'll charge publicly. But it's not the same as a petrol car where you have to make sure that you have a tank of the gas before you go, and you know where the service station is. What's really interesting to me, actually, because again, this thing about range anxiety is a thing, but there's a lot of talk about it. But according to Green Flag, 2,500 people every day run out of petrol, and they have to get rescued. So people don't realise that it's a thing for even for established technologies like petrol cars. But
That's hilarious. I wonder if they're all 17-year-olds. Most of them. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so
Yeah, but that's where we're going to see the probably in terms of visibility. That's what you'll really see a difference is that there'll be. I mean, autonomous vehicles are coming, but that's going to be a few years yet. But certainly, electric vehicles, car sharing, ride hailing. You know, the thing with owning a vehicle, and I love cars by the way, I always have done, is 95% of the you spend however many tens of thousands or thousands of pounds on a car, and 95% of the time it sits either in your car park at work or on your drive.
true.
It has about a 5% utilization, and that's just crazy. So
Yeah.
there'll be a big drive because increasingly, particularly in cities, you won't need a car. You'll be able to hail a cab, a scooter, a bike, whatever you need to do to get from A to B. So car ownership will definitely go down.
My imagination actually went spinning off there because I remember when my kids were small, they had a little exercise that came home from school, which was all about the hoverbike,
Right.
this kind of bubble that just raised up in the air and just took you places. And do you think something like that is reality?
Well, there are air taxis in Dubai. So again, some of our clients are manufacturing air taxis, so
Right.
they exist. They're obviously not mainstream just yet. It's more around regulation than technology. So that's I don't think again we're going to be hovering about in bubbles.
Oh, yeah.
Just yet. But
Nice idea.
mobility will be entirely different. The air taxis do exist. Short hop flights within the next few years will be electric versus jet fuel. Certainly for shorter distances. That's what really excites me. There's this massive disruption that I was asked to speak at an event recently that was not a clean tech event. It was just more of a business event.
Yeah.
And transport came up as a subject matter, and the lack of awareness or understanding of everybody about what's going on, primarily because it's not mainstream, it's not in the press, or when you do see something in the press, invariably it's something that's negative rather than something that's positive. And if you scratch beneath the surface, you'll just see that the world is already changed and is going through this massively quick disruption. And in the same way as now you could do nothing without your iPhone, it's central to life. I think the whole mobility thing, and the iPhone of course helps with that, or your smartphone, because you can hail a taxi, book a scooter, you can book your charging, or actually charging infrastructure thing. The other interesting thing is that there are actually more charge points in the UK than there are petrol stations, petrol pumps.
What, already? Really? Oh my goodness, I had no idea. It just goes to show that all these things, these innovations, they're creeping up and we don't realise until they smack us in the face.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. One of our clients, a company called Electricity, a German company, convert lampposts into charging posts. So
really?
There's a lot of places in London, in Richmond, in Hammersmith. There are quite a lot of many streets. A lot of the lampposts are effectively now charging points.
Wow. So David, we've got some questions coming through.
Okay.
So driverless technology, there's a question about that. So there are some more questions, but can you answer the question about driverless technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's massive billions of pounds is going into autonomous vehicles. I think it's going to be some time before you see them on our everyday streets. But I certainly think on campuses, on specific routes, fixed bus routes, you'll see autonomous buses and/or vehicles, transporting vehicles within the next couple of years, definitely. So, for example, your trip from the airport to at the airport from the gate to your plane will probably be autonomous. Certainly on campuses and universities, you'll see the transportation around the campuses will be autonomous. Where there's a fixed route, and obviously in some ways the DLR, interestingly enough, has always been autonomous. There's no drivers on the DLR, but that's where we'll see it in the next 2 or 3 years. There'll be specific sort of places and enclosed places where you'll see there'll be pods rather than buses that you just hop on, and it will take you from one place to another. I think the biggest issue around on the streets for autonomous vehicles is more about regulation than the technology, because there are, and again, if you can Google it, I can point people in the direction of, there's an awful lot of cars that are already driving around at test mode around the UK roads and around the US, fully autonomous. But from a legislative point of view, it's going to take a little while for humans to become comfortable with the fact that actually humans are not great drivers and computers are much better.
Yeah, I think computers would definitely be better than me, and I think my children would agree as well.
Infinitely safer, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So another question is, what about the ingredients that are needed to create this surge in mobility? Won't that create a new demand that will hurt other parts of the world? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is. I think there's, one should never shy away that nothing is absolutely perfect. And of course, some of the elements that are involved in batteries in particular are mined. So lithium is mined. The worst one really is cobalt, and there's an awful lot of investment going into creating batteries that don't actually use cobalt, because cobalt is mined primarily in the Congo and primarily in some pretty horrible conditions. So there's an awful lot of investment in sort of factoring cobalt out of battery manufacture. Their lithium SSAs, there's a lot of investment going on in that. That's actually not very disruptive or environmentally poor, certainly significantly better than mining for coal or for exploring for gas. So there's always, shouldn't ignore the fact that there are, shall we say, some cracked eggshells along the way. But all the studies that I've seen and participated in have shown that it's far better than the alternative. And let's not forget that most batteries that you and I will touch on a daily basis will be our laptops and our phones.
Yeah, I guess so. They will be, won't they? Yeah.
And they come from the same source. And it's been the sort of the advance of the mobile phone which has led to battery innovation, which has led to the electric vehicle, which is these chains of events which are really interesting.
Oh, so more about cobalt. So do our phones have cobalt in them, and what is the issue with cobalt?
Yeah, it's because it's primarily mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a lot of child labour, a lot of very poor working conditions, a lot of slave labour and sweatshop labour. And that's important not to ignore. It's also something which a lot of people will point at us, oh, but look at that, isn't that bad? But equally, they're quite happy to go and shop at Primark, where their clothes are probably made in the sweatshop. And they're quite happy to use their laptop and their mobile phone when the batteries are sourced from and created from the same materials. So, we do have to be careful about the supply chains. A good friend of mine called Simon Moores actually is the managing director of a company called Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, and they do a lot of analysis on where all the materials in the supply chain come from.
Okay.
And there's a lot of focus on making sure that it's improved and done as best as possible, and things like cobalt in particular are taken out of the process. There are some silver and other sort of rare earth materials in batteries, but not that much, and certainly no more than there is in your phone or in your laptop battery.
Okay, so it's great to know that there is innovation happening and that there is responsibility. People are looking at this issue. That's really great. So some more questions. I drive a hybrid and it was quite a bit more expensive, somebody says. So what have you got to say about that, David?
Sure, it depends when they bought it. So, and my first was a plug-in hybrid. So they were more expensive. And the thing about a hybrid is they're amazing machines in many regards, but it's almost the expense comes from because you've got two things. You've got a battery and a normal drivetrain.
Yeah.
So effectively, you've got, it's more expensive because you've got both. So to date, before now, hybrid made sense because batteries weren't necessarily equipped to go on the long drives that they are now. Even just 2 or 3 years ago would be very different. So the costs are plummeting down. As I mentioned, certainly the anticipation is that by 2023 there will be very little cost, if any, between a petrol car and an electric car. But hybrids have been more expensive. The other thing is, unfortunately, because it's expensive to build cars, a lot of the EV cars, electric vehicles initially were quite expensive. It was the likes of your Jag, your BMW, Tesla, very expensive cars, because those were the people who could afford it and not worry too much about it. But increasingly now you're getting a full range of shall we say, normal cars that for cities. Volkswagen are spending a fortune on their transition to electric vehicles after Dieselgate. That's one of the good outcomes of that. They've really turned their game around. Honda are bringing some great vehicles to market. Skoda are. So if you're buying a new car now or in the next 2 or 3 years, you'll see very little difference in the cost.
Great. So it's coming to the mainstream, which is good news for everybody. Okay, so more questions. What is the technology beyond your next vision? If you allow your horizon to expand as much as possible, where does it lead to? So blue sky thinking.
This is really great because, that's the good thing about entrepreneurs and business. You're always looking at what's the next business opportunity, and you always move things along. And we've done that very successfully, or I've done that very successfully with the Hyperion business. When we started the business, we did an awful lot in solar and in renewables before batteries were really a thing. But I kind of saw that coming along, so we adapted our business to be able to cope with batteries for stationary storage and for grid usage. And then eMobility become a thing, and we've moved our market into that. What's really going to change, I guess, now is a lot of stuff, which is the digitalization of everything. So just in the same way as telecoms is entirely different now, how we get and receive our energy is going to be very different. Even at the moment, you probably won't be aware necessarily, unless you're a geek like me, but many weekends recently, particularly during COVID, when energy usage was down, there was an excess of power, and many people I know were being paid to use electricity and paid to charge their cars.
Oh, really?
So that's just that, this whole thing about energy flows one way, and it's all comes from a very central power plant, and it comes to your home and you have to use it. And that's all entirely changing. So the bigger horizon is just the whole usage of energy will be very different, and the usage of mobility. Like I say, I think particularly people will own very much less, in the same way as we stream music. Nobody buys a CD anymore, you just stream it. The usage and ownership of vehicles will go down quite substantially, and so there'll be a whole raft of both tools and apps and technologies which will replace that. And that's where the big certainly in the next 4 or 5 years will come. If you want to get more ambitious, there are things still that are being invested. Some of my investor friends are invested in fusion nuclear, which is entirely different from a risk perspective to the current nuclear options. If anybody really does crack that, and they've been doing it, trying a long time, that's absolutely a game changer. But that's probably, again, 10, 15 year, potentially beyond that. But certainly in the next 4 or 5 years, the biggest difference would be in how you get your energy, how you use it, how you store it, and how you get from A to B.
Really amazing and very insightful as well. Right, some more comments. Drive hybrid, 2 years old, congratulations. And you mentioned music.
Yeah.
Not quite sure what that means, but anyway, any thoughts, any comments on music?
Music's a great thing. I think, as I say, just in terms of how we're utilizing things, and again, it's for our kids, and I know you've got a young daughter as well, just they will think it's obscene that you have, as I have in the garage, loads and loads of vinyl or loads and loads of CDs, and what on earth did you need them for? Because you just flip on your phone and you can listen to anything you want. Same with Netflix. Why did you really have to stay up and watch 4 channels, as I did when I was a kid? But now you can stream anything, anytime, anywhere. And I guess it's just that a continuation of those things from music and TV and Netflix, all that kind of stuff, is that mobility and energy will be much more engaging. Once upon a time, it was just a case you went home, you turned on the switch, your electricity worked. That's all you needed to know. You were passive. And increasingly, people will become active in energy. And going back to that point of where you can get paid to charge your car, or you can get paid to use electricity if you time your tariffs right, or if you have solar panels on your house, you can utilize your own electricity. People will become much more engaged via an apps without much. You don't have to be a technical geek. You just have an app that says, right now, energy prices are low, so I'll use some energy. I'll put the washing machine on.
Amazing. So the comments are coming through thick and fast, Dave, but I think everybody's getting very excited about this topic now. So are we likely to see a reversion to old technology in the same way we have seen people revert to turntables and vinyl, is the question. So is it kind of going to become like a cult thing that, I've got one of these old cars,
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Going back to people, as you all know, people are adverse to change, and it's very uncomfortable change, and disruption is very uncomfortable. So you're still in this phase at the moment where an awful lot of people are rail against electric vehicles because they just love the noise of their petrol car. And I grew up a petrol head, by the way. I love cars. But a lot of people will fear the change. A lot of people quite push against it, but you can't change the technology. But absolutely what will happen is petrol cars will be for the racetrack. It'll be fun. It'll be your hobby. In the same way as you'll have your final turntable, isn't it great? We'll get out some old vinyl every now and then, and you'll have a sort of a cult, as you say, or a sort of a small subset of people who really still get into the vinyl or get into horse riding. We don't use horses anymore for transportation, but a lot of people ride them. And I think the same will be the case for cars, or for petrol cars, and sort of there'll be race days and track days and stuff. You'll always have people who yearn for earlier things, and there'll be a place for that. And that's not a bad thing, of course.
Retro. Retro cult interest.
Yeah.
By the time they're our age, it's, oh my God, can you remember when?
Well, look at the things now. I mean, we look back and, even in my very early youth, and so my grandparents would have, had a coal hole in the garden. You had to go and grab your coal and fill up your fireplace. And now, that's just insane to think of that. And that's how technologies move along. But there are still people, of course, who have coal and log burners and stuff like that, because it's, there's a comforting factor in that. So for sure, I think people will certainly love vehicles, and want to still own and track their old Porsches or Vauxhalls or whatever they might happen to be. It'll be a quaint, cute thing that we used to do back in the day.
Okay, right. What do you drive now is a question that's coming through.
I'm on the waiting list. Unfortunately, the demand outstrips supply with electric vehicles. So my friend's just got his first Kia full electric Kia, and it took him 6 months to get that. I'm on the waiting list for a Porsche Taycan at the moment. Presently, I drive a plug-in hybrid, which is a BMW 530e.
Would you recommend it?
Yeah, it's an amazing car. The downside of it, hybrids, as I say, is that you've got both technologies in there, which makes them slightly more heavy and slightly more expensive to buy in the first place, because you've got the battery and you've got the engine. So for now, it's great. But and again, if you are someone who right now travels an awful lot, a hybrid's probably a better option for you.
Okay.
And when I'm saying like 50, 60,000 miles a year, not 10, 12, 20,000 miles a year, because you can do that in an electric vehicle now, and certainly will be able to in the next couple of years.
Cool.
Unfortunately, demand is far outstripping supply. And if you look at the figures, although of course they were down recently because of COVID, but the vast majority of vehicles being sold at the moment are electric. Traditional car sales are going down significantly in the UK and elsewhere.
Okay. So somebody is saying, I changed from I'm not a technical car person, but it will mean something to you, I'm sure. I changed from an MB 350e and now a Hyundai 1600 hybrid self-charging. I wouldn't want to change back.
I have a big thing about self-charging cars. There was a lot of misleading advertising, which was actually banned in a lot of places, not the UK, unfortunately. Self-charging was referred to a mild hybrid. Is a mild hybrid better than having a pure petrol? Yes, it is. No, you don't have to charge. So I don't know who the person was. They might have had difficulty with charging infrastructure. The Mercedes-Benz 350 actually was a plug-in hybrid, so you didn't have to plug that in anyway, because I had one of those previously. Yeah. So I'm not sure what the difficulties were. But again, a mild hybrid is better than mild means it doesn't have a plug. It kind of generates some electricity sort of from the energy, from the braking and from transport. But these things are a matter of taste. But I would pretty much say to anybody, if you drive an electric vehicle, go and test one, whether it's a Leaf or a Zoe or a Tesla. As I'm a petrol head, I grew up loving sports cars, and I wouldn't go back.
Okay, so Nick Bradley, he's actually registered, so it's great to see you, Nick. He says, at least it's a Porsche. David.
When it comes, hopefully, yeah. I know Nick's had Porsches in the past, but again, technology-wise, they're always a company that's been leading at these things. And I think the important thing to recognise, as I said before, there's a lot of very expensive cars out there, but equally, it's certainly now and in the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be a whole range of city cars and low-cost cars. You can get an electric Corsa, you can get an electric Golf. These will come into market as we speak, but I'll take Nick for a spin when it arrives.
I'm sure he'll love that. Okay, well, anything else that you'd like to bring to our attention tonight? This has been a really amazing interview, David, and is there anything else that you'd like to announce or tell us about? Anything that you're doing, a new initiative, or? Oh, I think David's frozen. I'm afraid I can't get David back. I think he's frozen. We've had the most amazing interview tonight. It's been really, really wonderful to have him here. And I just wanted to say thank you. I'm not quite sure what's happened, But anyway, it's been great to have you here, David, and thank you so much for joining us. It's just me now, so hope you enjoyed this, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week at the same time on the Connection Central series of the Smart Connector. Bye for now.